Good morning and welcome to First Baptist Church. It's great to have you here for our live stream worship service. I appreciate Jane and her contribution with the music and Alan with the welcome and announcements. He's been doing that for a couple months now, and we appreciate that, Alan. My sermon this morning will be from John chapter 1. We'll begin reading of verse 45. We'll read through 51. I'll also drop in a little bit later to John chapter 14, verse 6, but we'll look primarily at John chapter 1. It's a passage that when I first started looking at it, it seems a little bit confusing. It's not always clear what's going on between Jesus and Nathanael and the discussion. It almost seems like we're missing something. And I think to really understand what's going on, as I've looked at it and tried to understand the discussion and the conversation. I think to really understand what's going on here in John chapter 1, verses 45 through 51, we have to have some understanding what happened back in the book of Genesis. Because in my understanding, I believe that the reference that Jesus is making and the conversation between Jesus and Nathanael assumes we have in mind something that happened in the life of Jacob back in the Old Testament. If you remember, Jacob is the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. Jacob was a twin. He had a twin brother, Esau. And Esau and Jacob were far from identical twins. Esau was the firstborn, and he came out, he was a hairy guy. They said he had so much red hair, it looked like a fur coat. He was just covered with hair. And so when he was born, they named him Esau, which sounds like the word for hair or hairy. So he went through his whole life being called Hairy, the hairy one. That was his name. Now, when Esau was born, his twin Jacob actually, it says, had a hold of Esau's heel. And as Esau came out, it's almost like Jacob said, no, I should come out first. And so when Jacob was born, they called him heel, a word that sounds like heel, which also is the same basic word for deceiver, someone who was trying to pull the other son back in and take his place. And so they grew up, one child was called Harry, and the other child was basically called deceiver. And the word, the name for Jacob was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because he did indeed become kind of a deceptive, sly person most of his life. We see in Genesis chapter 25 that he kind of conned his brother Esau out of his birthright with that honor being the firstborn son. Esau said, it's not important to me. You can have it. You can take it. You take all that honor. I don't care about the family stuff. So he kind of conned or deceived his brother out of the birthright. And then a couple chapters later, we see that Jacob also not only conned him out of his birthright, but he went to dad secretly, pretending that he was Esau. He put the lamb fur on his arms and the back of his neck, because Esau was a real hairy guy. And so when Dad Isaac felt him, he was blind. He felt him there, and he felt all that lamb's wool on his arms and the back of his neck. Said, this must be my son Esau. And so Isaac gave Jacob the family blessing that was intended to go to Esau. And that was almost kind of a legally binding thing back there. And when Isaac gave that to Jacob, who deceived Dad, there's no way that he could then give it back to Esau. And so Isaac cheated or deceived Esau, and Jacob deceived Isaac and cheated Esau. Then you go fast forward a little few years down the road when Jacob was in a foreign land. He ran for his life. Esau tried to kill him, and Jacob ran for his life, and he went to another land. He got married, ended up getting cheated by his father-in-law. He had to marry both of the sisters in his family. When they were getting ready to leave, he basically cheated his father-in-law out of a whole herd of sheep. He manipulated the birthing situation so that he got all of the sheep and the lambs that were spotted and had stripes and stuff in their fur that were considered to be of poorer quality, and he cheated father-in-law out of that. And then he came home. But there's a couple of things in the story that we need to understand also. Not only the fact that Jacob was a deceiver, but in Jacob's life there were a couple instances that were critical to understand what's going on here with the conversation between Jesus and Nathanael. When Jacob was running away from home, trying to get away from Esau and going to this foreign land to live with his relatives there, he had a dream. He dreamed that the place where he was laying on the ground, or the very place where his pillow was, if you will, he dreamed that this was a portal or the stairway from earth to heaven. And he saw the angels coming out of heaven to earth and going back up from earth to heaven. And he got this sense that he was at the very doorstep of heaven. And so he made an altar there and called this Bethel, which means house of God. And so he had this vision, this dream, that he was located at the very house of God, the place where God's presence came down to earth and where mankind could have access to the presence of God. And this was a very moving event in his life. And then later, as he was coming back with his wives and children and had all of the thing, he's going back home years later, he had another encounter with God. And this one is also kind of strange, where there was an angel, or some say that the Son of God, or what, different aspects, but there's a messenger of God who was there and met Jacob. And they wrestled together. And Jacob must have been a pretty strong guy, because they had to wrestle all night long. And then eventually the angel or the Son of God touched Jacob's hip, kind of broke the hip, got it out of place or whatever. It was the only way he really was able to overcome. And as a result of the interaction, the angel, the messenger of God, changed Jacob's name from being deceiver to the name of Israel, which means God fights or God struggles, which in my mind, it's kind of like saying, you are a strong man of God. So we have the story of Jacob, who started off being a deceiver, who had the encounters with God and was changed, transformed to being Israel, the mighty man of God, or God fights, or God struggles, or you know, I like to think of it as in the terms of a strong, mighty man of God. So we have this transformation. And I think if we understand this thought, this story, it helps us to better understand the conversation between Jesus and Nathanael in John chapter 1. Philip had met Jesus already. He had learned who Jesus was and was convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God. So the first thing he did, he ran and found his brother Nathanael in John chapter 1, verse 45. It says that Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, "We have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth." "Nazareth!" exclaimed Nathanael. "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" "Come and see for yourself," Philip replied. Nazareth was a rough town back then. There was a Roman garrison there. A lot of the young, tough soldiers were there, and like a lot of military towns, Nazareth had a bad reputation for being rough and rowdy. And so a lot of the Israelites, whenever they thought of Nazareth, the only thing they thought of was this rough, rowdy, bar-strong, prostitutes, drinking, fighting town where all of these foreign Romans would gather. And it's not exactly the kind of place you would expect to find the Messiah coming from. So it's obvious and it's natural that Nathanael would be skeptical that the Messiah could come from there. But Philip said, "You need to come experience Jesus yourself." In verse 47 it says, as Philip and Nathanael approached Jesus, Jesus said, "Now here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity." Here is it's almost as if he said, Here comes a man who is a genuine son of Israel, the person who became a mighty man of God, not a son of Jacob who was a deceiver. Here comes a person who is a strong man of God like Israel, someone who's a man of perfect integrity, who's a righteous, a strong man of God. Jesus was making a comment about who Nathanael is deep down his heart. A strong, committed man of God, a man of honesty, a man of integrity. Now, we have the assumption that Jesus and Nathanael had never met before. Certainly Nathanael didn't know who Jesus was, and certainly Nathanael had no way of understanding that maybe Jesus knew who he was. So Nathanael was surprised. So that's the first thing he said, verse 48. How do you know about me? He asked. We don't know each other. I've never met you. You've never met me. How do you know my temperament? How do you know I'm an honest man? How do you know that I'm a man like Israel, a man of integrity, rather than a man like Jacob, who is a deceiver? And then Jesus said something that in most of our minds flies completely under the radar. We don't even have any way of understanding any significance of what Jesus says in reply in verse 48. Jesus replied, I could see you under the fig tree before Philip found you. No bells, no whistles goes off in any of our minds when we read that. Yeah, all right, so Nathanael was taking a nap under a fig tree. Who knows, he had his lunch there. Why is that important? But you see from Nathanael's response, that comment by Jesus was way more than just, I saw you napping under the fig tree, or that I was sneaking around and see where Philip went and I saw you there. It was way more than I saw that you were sitting under a tree. Because Nathanael said, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. From what Jesus said, Nathanael changed from being a skeptic who thought nothing good can come from Nazareth to being someone who was totally convinced that Jesus was the Son of God. Now, what is it about what Jesus said that made that big difference in Nathanael? Now, I have to take a few steps of assumption here. I have to kind of go out on a limb on assumptions of what Jesus was saying. The phrase back in Jesus' time is, I saw you under the fig tree. That's a phrase that's basically used for meditating. Being under the fig tree is a phrase for someone who's spending time in prayer and meditation. It may not literally have been a fig tree that Nathanael was under, but he obviously was spending some time in prayer and meditation before he came to Jesus. And so Jesus said, I saw you in prayer. I saw you having a time of meditation with God. But I'm going to step out a little bit further with an assumption here. I think it goes beyond the fact that Nathanael was meditating. I have this personal assumption, and again, I'm just my own assumption here. I think maybe what Nathanael was doing as he was sitting in meditation and prayer under the fig tree, I kind of suspect maybe Nathanael was thinking back on Israel and Jacob. And he was contemplating the fact that this man who was a deceiver, this man who had this rotten life, has somehow been chosen by God and transformed by God from being a person of deception, Jacob, to being a person who was a strong man of God, Israel. And maybe Nathanael was contemplating of this great transition that God made through the life of his ancestor Jacob. And maybe he was pondering the grace and mercy of God. Maybe he was thinking how marvelous it is that God could make a transition in someone's heart to change them from being a deceiver to being a strong man of God. I really think maybe that's what was going on, because when Jesus said, I saw you under the fig tree, Nathanael realized that only God himself was privy to the conversation he was having, the meditation. Anybody could have seen him asleep under the fig tree. but to know what was going on in its heart, where this whole discussion of a genuine son of Israel, a person of complete integrity, only Jesus could have known that he was contemplating the transition of Jacob from being a scoundrel to a righteous man. Only God could have known that. And the only way Jesus could have known that is if he is the Son of God, the Messiah, God in the flesh, the person who knows the thoughts of God. So Nathanael was convinced as, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. And Jesus replied, said, do you believe this? Just because I told you I saw you under the fig tree? You'll see greater things than this. I tell you the truth. You will all see heaven open and the angels of God going up and down on the Son of Man, who is the stairway between heaven and earth. I see again in this statement a reference back to the experience Jacob, Israel, had when he was fleeing from Esau and going to his relative's land, and he had this dream of being at the very portal of heaven, being there where their stairway went from heaven to earth, and God's messengers, God's angels went up and down, and we had the messages coming from God to earth, and we had the concerns of earth going back up to God. And Jacob had this dream of having the privilege of being in that location. And I see Jesus saying, if you follow me, you will experience the portal of heaven. If you follow me, if you spend time with me, you will experience the stairway of heaven, because in this translation it says, I am the stairway to heaven. Where you will experience God's presence. You will experience God's message coming from heaven, and you will experience our concerns going back up to God, because I am the one who is the path to God. If you follow me, you will experience God's presence, God's blessing, God's power. To me, that's a profound statement. To me, that's something that strikes to my heart. And I'm sure perhaps that Nathanael understood that. I don't know. Maybe they were expecting to see real live angels coming around, or maybe they just understood that this was a spiritual reference. But as I look at this, I think of the truth that Jesus is the stairway to heaven. Jesus is the portal, the bridge, if you will, between heaven and earth, the one who came from God to spend time with us. The man who was here was a reflection of God in the flesh. And Jesus says it this way in John chapter 14, verse 6. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except by me. Jesus said it over and over again, that he is the way to heaven. In fact, the book of John, if you look back in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, John, he said, there's lots of stuff I could have written about as I'm telling you the story of Jesus, but I included these stories specifically so that you could know who Jesus is and place your faith in him. Jesus told this story, John told this story about the interaction between Jesus and Nathanael, so that we could understand that Jesus is God in the flesh. Jesus is the one who is the stairway to heaven. That Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. If we want to draw closer to God, we must do that by placing our faith in Jesus. That's a message we need to know. That's a message we need to understand. Maybe you've had a lot of experiences in your life. Maybe you find yourself being more like Jacob, the deceiver. Maybe you have had a lot of time where you've been pursuing your own interests, your own concerns. You've never really spent that much time truly following God, and your heart has been one of deception. Your heart has been one that has been in rebellion against God, just doing your own thing. Maybe that life has gone well for you. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe deep down inside your heart, as you reflect on your life, you say, being the deceiver, being the Jacob, being the one who has not committed my life to Jesus has brought me a lot of emptiness inside. Maybe you'd like to have Jesus transform you. Maybe you'd like to have the experience of having God transform your life, to change you from being that person who's the deceiver, that person who's the rebel, the person who's running from God, to be that person like Israel, who's the strong man of God. Of being a person like Nathaniel, who's a person of complete integrity. Maybe you think, I've just spent so much time in my life wasted not following God, just following my own way. If that's who you are, that's who you've been. If you'd like to have a transformation so that God changes you from being a person who's rebelling to being a person who knows God's mercy and grace, I invite you to come to Jesus today. I invite you to turn your life over to him and allow God to transform you to being his child, a new person. Jesus is the way. Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the one who can bring true life, spiritual life, in our hearts. If you'd like to know more about how you can make Jesus be the Lord of your life, if you'd like to know how you can have that change in your heart, that you're not really sure what to do, give me a call. Send me a text. Send me an email. Just let me know. Set an appointment. I'd be glad to visit with you. My cell phone number is 303-808-0935. Give me a call or text me. I'd love to get together and visit with you about what it means to be a child of God and how we can experience his grace. Well, let's spend some time now in prayer, and then we'll close with a benediction. Let's look to God in prayer. God, I thank you for your love. I thank you for the grace and mercy you give us, your willingness to accept the Jacobs and embrace us, and your ability to transform us, to be people of integrity, lives that have been transformed. God, I pray for my friends out here who perhaps have never made that commitment and don't know what that change looks like or even if it's possible. I ask God that you continue to speak to their hearts right now and give them the courage to take the step, calling me or texting me, or even just right where they're sitting, to make a commitment of their life to you right here, right now. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you make the decision to commit your life to God, I'd love to hear about it. Again, let me know. Just give me a call, send me a text, write me a letter, whatever. Stop me someplace on the street, let me know. I'd love to hear that. Now receive the benediction, the blessing from God that's found in Numbers chapter 6. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord be good to you and give you his peace. Go in his peace. Amen. God bless you.